Another poll was a neck race for the UK's referendum on EU membership. This one also found that half of Brexiters had little idea of how a vote to leave would affect their holiday and travel plans. Well, travel commentator Frank Brahaney says everything from visa fees and flight prices to travel delay compensation and roaming charges could be affected if we vote to back Brexit tomorrow. Well, our reporter Josh Martin spoke to consumer champion Frank Brahaney and first asked for the survey's most surprising result.
I think the most surprising thing was when we decided to speak to those who told us they were going to leave, we pointed out to them that did they realise that if you vote to leave, there was a potential, and we could only stress it at that they could lose various travel consumer rights. And 49% of your listeners told us that they actually didn't realise that. Actually, what was really surprising was 2 points. 23% said as a result, because we then said, does that change how you intend to vote? And 23% said, yes, it does. We're going to change our vote. 34% said no. But we do have concerns about the loss of those consumer rights. And I think, whatever about, who's going to vote in or out, what's interesting about our survey is the fact that consumers are telling us that they really want to hear about the effect on their daily lives, whether they travel or buy a fridge freezer, for example, or a car. It doesn't matter what it is. And they're not getting the message, whether it's from Remain or whether it's from Leave, what they're going to do, whether it's a Remain or an exit, about consumer rights. How are they going to protect those rights that they've had, certainly as far as travel is concerned, for the last 30 years?
So your critique of the campaign so far from both sides would be, we've heard so much about immigration, so much about the economy, and I suppose the stuff you're stressing about consumer rights is simply, in many cases, it's the flip side, the other side of the coin of what lots of people have just been calling that EU red tape. These kind of consumer laws, as far as holidays and travel is concerned, would be some of the red tape that may end up being cut. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, this so-called red tape, I love that expression, but these regulations for travel really make up the single market. It's what makes travel work. The goal of the European Union is to grow tourism, to make it a real growth product within the European economy. Whilst industry benefits from the single market, the argument is that consumers also is the oil that greases it, that makes it work. And that's why we have these particular regulations.
So what kind of holiday costs are affected and influenced by the UK's membership of the EU? What type of things are you talking about?
Well, I think the most obvious one is, say, like the Open Skies Agreement, which is effectively liberalised about the way our airspace is governed, and it's brought in competition. So, the likes of EasyJet, Ryanair, we have seen a real fall in the price of airfares, and also a much wider range of destinations throughout Europe, to destinations that we couldn't get to many, many years ago. So, that's one of the principal benefits that we've seen. I also think that, with the Package Travel Directive, for example, and the regulations, it's also had a very positive effect on the quality of those holidays and actually introduced quite a few new players, particularly in the single market, and particularly the expansion of travel companies operating within the single market, not in the UK, and UK consumers buying from people in the single market at a lower price than what they can get it in the UK. So there are lots of cost benefits for consumers as a result of some of these legislations that's come in.
So how will the UK travel market and the holiday market be affected by a Brexit vote? You've said some of the really good regulations and consumer rights laws that have come into effect because of our EU membership. But is it a guarantee that if we voted for a Brexit, those rights would be diminished or even removed?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because we hear so much about the fact that we're not going to subscribe to the free movement of persons. But as you know, Josh, the 4 pillars of the single market and the EEA is goods, services, persons and capital. And if we're not going to subscribe to that, then we won't have access to that. So overnight, we would probably lose 8 regulations which, are just simply implemented. They don't have to go through the national parliaments. So things like air passenger rights, coach passenger rights, ferry rights and so on would disappear. And, you've got a set of consumers in the UK who have been so used to this, certainly for the last 20 years. If what we're hearing is correct, that the UK Parliament would feel empowered, as it were, galvanised to make stronger laws on behalf of consumers, then we may actually recapture those particular rights.
Exactly, because that's the argument of the Brexiteers. They're saying that those laws and rights, whether they are consumer, environmental, worker rights, business law, could simply be replicated or improved on, but done through Westminster.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with that at all. But you know what, Josh? I've actually asked the 4 campaigns, I've asked Remain and the 3 Leave campaigns that very question. How are you going to preserve these rights, EU regulations and directive rights that consumers now currently enjoy in the event of an independent Brexit? And you know what, Josh? Not one single one of them has responded. Where the debate is so polarised around a very limited number of topics. Commentators like me, campaigners like me, cannot give a straight answer about what is going on. The politicians are failing consumers. Nobody is giving the answer. They can give an answer, but they're clearly choosing not to do so. And I think, ordinary consumers who work 50 weeks of the year for that precious 2 weeks of the year, they deserve to hear what they intend to do, whether it's Remain or whether it's Exit. I'd like to hear, so I can tell the consumers who come to our helpline how it's going to affect them. At the moment, it's a bit of a guesstimate.
Well, I'll get you to guesstimate a little bit more if you don't mind, Frank. One of the big benefits of travelling within Europe, or the EU in particular, is the European health insurance card.
Yeah.
Is there any indication that Brits would still be able to use this in the event of Brexit?
It depends on how we define Brexit. If, for example, we Brexit in the sense of becoming like a Norway option or perhaps operating in the EEA, then no, we wouldn't lose that EHIC card. But, and here's the caveat, we'd have to subscribe to the 4 pillars of movements: goods, services, persons and capital. And if you don't subscribe to one of them, then you don't have access to that market and you wouldn't get that EHIC benefit. And I think probably, let's just kind of speculate a little bit further while we're at it. If we ended up in that situation, UK consumers could be facing having to get a more comprehensive insurance policy than what they currently buy, and that could actually add to the cost of going abroad as well, because we'd need a very specialised policy to cover those very hefty medical bills.
Now, Frank, do you see any positives of a Brexit vote as far as travel and holidays and tourism is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I as much as I've tried to sort of look at the problems of leaving, I've also tried to look at it from the Leave point of view, and I've actually listed out about 10 potential benefits. I mean, for example, a weaker pound. It would be cheaper to come to the UK. This would help the UK economy. It would, obviously, the counterbalance to that would make it more expensive to go abroad, but it could encourage UK consumers to stay at home. It'd be a benefit to UK transport with the extra demand on staycations. But equally, more demand into the UK could actually, with the supply and demand thing, make it more expensive. Duty-free could be restored. We all used to love going in and getting that cheaper bottle of whiskey or whatever. But, the other side of the flip side of the coin is we might have to pay a duty at the other end when we get the other side. We may end up charging for visa entry. Turkey did it last year, for example. And we may end up doing that, but equally conversely, we may find that we would have to do that. We'd have to pay that in itself. We also may find, for example, that the UK government may feel freer to offer stronger foreign travel advisories. Really important after Tunisia and various other destinations. And it's been subject to quite a lot of debate. But, the pressures of negotiating individual treaties might actually have an impact on being a little bit more or less honest, shall we say, about a destination when you come to write those advisories.
Frank, we've heard a lot, particularly from David Cameron, and when he does briefly speak about the impacts on travel and tourism, he talks about holidays becoming more expensive. Can you just explain why that would be the case?
I've tried to follow his rationale and his logic, and in fact I decided to look at it on my own. I think if it's going to have an effect, it's going to be on things like perhaps difference in currency exchange, and obviously on how tour companies buy into those particular products. Indeed, how the cost of air flights would affect us here in the UK, that kind of thing. Visa entry charges and stuff like that. I think the pressures from an independent Brexit could potentially add extra cost, whatever about the price of oil. And so, for example, you may have the average cost of an all-inclusive holiday to Spain is about £850 per person. So if you take out discounts as a family of four, mum and dad and two kids, £2,500 currently for an average holiday. And we tried to sort of calculate it around all of these different factors. And we did factor in, the kind of oil price fall. But we reckoned that prices would probably rise by about 10%. So you're looking at about a £250 increase in that annual holiday. And I think the other issue here is about the currency exchange. So again, I think, if, for example, I think it's at 125 today, if we have a leave vote, say, on the 24th of June, we may see it fall, I've seen it predicted, to about 118. That could actually, in order to get the same value of, say, £1,000 worth of spending money, you might have to bring an extra £100 with you in order to get the same value when you travel abroad. So, these are potentially small costs, but not that small when you're talking about a consumer who's worked hard 50 weeks or perhaps spent 2 or 3 years saving for that holiday.
Well, that was consumer champion Frank Brahaney there, speaking to our reporter Josh Martin.